It is such an honour to be here at TEDxCanberra. I've come all the way from northwestern New South Wales. And I've come here with a very specific purpose and point in mind. I've come here because I need your help, and I've come here because I've got a challenge to throw down. Not just to you guys here, but to Australia in general, and particularly to my favourite humans on Earth. That's my family back in rural and remote Australia. Typical to my own form, I've picked a really tricky topic and a really tricky demographic. I want to bring a conversation into the public. I've already been doing it, and I want your help to get that conversation further and wider and to the reaches of our rural and remote areas. It's a conversation about modern-day addiction, and it's a conversation about what I call casual alcoholism. It's a real thing, and it's impacting people, and it's happening out west. This is not an imaginary epidemic, and I take this really seriously because I love my country mates, and I'm pretty worried about them right now. As you can see, that's what out west looks like at the moment. Has anyone been for a drive into regional or remote parts of the country recently? Yeah, not that many of you, which is understandable, it's a long way to go. It looks horrendous. I've never seen anything like the drought that we're experiencing right now. And I'm concerned because the demographic that I want to speak to, my peers and professionals in remote Australia, are typically and historically a very stoic, tough bunch of people, right? We don't like to ask for help. We don't like to admit when we're doing it tough. And we tend to just keep going and going and going and being extraordinary, because that's what country people do. We are pretty amazing, I have to say, until we're not. So it's funny, our strength can also be our weakness. I want to just show you something for a moment, some statistics on alcohol. At the moment, in Australia, every year, we're spending about $36 billion on alcohol-related illness, injury and death. At the moment, about 6,000 people every year are being wiped out, dead, due to alcohol-related injury or death. And we've got about 156,000 hospitalisations going on annually. Now, those are really, really frightening statistics, are they not? But what concerns me is it kind of means nothing to the people I want to talk to, because we look okay, we sound okay, we're pretty intelligent people with mortgages and cars and good haircuts and, kids in fancy schools and all that sort of thing. And these statistics don't tend to penetrate because we think we're immune. And there's a few issues in this area because we're obviously not immune. We're not immune at all to being part of these statistics. But high-functioning people are what concern me the most. And when we look at these numbers, and I think about my mates, I think about me, I get really frightened because where I come from, we measure a bloke by how many beers he can drink. Where I come from, if a lady is embracing and worshipping wine o'clock, that's the done thing. And I know that's not reserved solely for rural or remote Australia. But we've got about 500,000 people in rural and remote Australia who cannot access information or support in this area. And if push ever comes to shove in that demographic and someone needs to reach out and ask for help, there really often is no help to be had. Now, I'm sure some of you are sitting right there going, but hold on a minute, who are you to speak about these things? Are you a politician? Or are you an economist? No, I'm obviously neither of those things. I'm just a girl from the country. But what I bring is something that hasn't really been done before. I'm a small town girl with a history of living all over rural and regional Australia. I've been doing that for 44 odd years. I know this area, I know this demographic, and I know these people. And I love, love, love being a country girl. But it also is a challenging space. It's a very challenging space to dwell in because we are prone to doing things our way and not acknowledging when we're not okay. And I was a person exactly like that. So I speak from a small town, lived experience point of view. And I don't think anyone's done that yet, because everyone tells me I'm bloody mad, for starters, to be doing it. But I'm so glad I'm doing it. I would change nothing about this. You see, 4 years ago, I had what you call, I believe, in the media, a rock bottom experience. 4 years ago, I was at my absolute end. I should have died. I did want to die. I did want to take my own life. But I'm standing here. When that was all going on for me in my life, I was in such a state of denial because I looked okay, I sounded okay, I had a really successful career doing photography and travelling and speaking. I refused flatly when people suggested I might be an alcoholic to even take that on board, because thanks very much, I never drank every day and I never drank during the day, and I wasn't a homeless guy in the gutter. So how rude, how could someone dare suggest that to me? Funny, isn't it, how we love to kid ourselves? And I guess what was going on all around me was a lot of people saying, no, you're right, Shan, you've just had a crap life. You've had a few tricky things happen to you. And I have, and I did. But in as much as I was in denial, I think my mates were in denial with me, because it's a really uncomfortable, weird space to be in, contemplating where you're at. But in the true nature of a stoic country person, I just kept going, I just kept going, I just kept going. And I should have gotten help a lot sooner than what I did, but I refused to, as I said, acknowledge it or admit where I was at. Now, I've had a wonderful life of privilege, and something people often ask me is, hang on, well, if you had a supportive family and you've got a loving husband, how did things get to this? Like, what's the go with that? So I'll take you for a little step backwards into my past, if you like. And when I was a young, very fresh-faced, very naive country kid, and I was about as socially inept as you could possibly get. My family weren't big on socialising. I wasn't exposed to a vast, array of social situations, but holy moly, I knew I loved to socialise. And when my gap year came, I sprinted out the front gate. I couldn't go out there into the world of into the world of adulting quickly enough. I couldn't. I was just beside myself. I thought, this is going to be great. But unfortunately for me, it wasn't great. My gap year was an utter disaster. And I don't need to go into the details, but it was a story as old of time as a good kid, young kid, naive, add some alcohol, add some country parties, add some blokes who probably should have known better than what they did. And a few ordinary things happened to me that year that set me on a path to self-destruction, self-doubt, fear, shame, guilt. And the events of that year would really alter the trajectory of my life in a big way. I was shattered. But I did what we do in the country, and I forged on, and I kept rolling. I kept going, and I didn't ask for help. And I think, to be really honest, had I even asked for help, would it have been there? I doubt it, because that's what I've learned about what's going on in the bush. Come back into the future, a step or two, and 38-year-old me is still doing okay. I look all right on paper. I've got a beautiful husband, best bloke in Australia. Sorry, ladies. But I'm not so great. I'm still that little wounded kid inside, and I still haven't had support or treatment. And I always cry when I get to this bit. We found out when I was about 38 that it was unlikely we were going to be able to have children, and then that seemed like a certainty. And the truth of that utterly crushed me. I had spent all my life just wanting to be a mum. I loved kids, kids loved me, and it's just what I had lined up for my future and for my husband, because he's an amazing bloke. And when that was obviously not going to happen, I took this destructive relationship that I had with alcohol, I took it to a whole new level. My passionate love for wine o'clock became an utter self-destructive cycle of blackout drinking. And all the while, I looked pretty normal, somewhat attractive perhaps, if you look Vaseline on the glass. I looked like a normal person the whole time. I kept the facade going, but I was falling apart in increments, and it nearly killed me. And you know what happened? I'm so glad it nearly killed me because I finally desperately reached out for help, and I was put onto a lady who was a recovered alcoholic in the country. And I met her and I sat with her and she told me her story. And for the first time in my entire life, I saw that I was not alone in this. In 1 hour of talking to a woman who'd been there and done that and who was a normal, functioning, regular-looking human, my eyes were just opened wide and I went, what? How have I not been given access to this information, this kind of real, honest talk? How have I never been? My mind was just blown. I thank God for that girl, you know. I went home and I just put everything to one side and I worked harder than I've ever worked in my whole life to become a 100% sober Australian country person. I studied it like it was a university degree and I made it. I recovered completely, and I do call that a miracle because plenty of people don't. And I have a really big problem with that because if we dug deep as a rural community and started having better chats with our mates about the truth of addiction and the reality of casual alcoholism, we would be able to change the course of the lives of countless Shannas out there. And I remember I was a couple of years into my sobriety and I had this little light bulb moment and I turned around to my husband and I said, sweetheart, I think I'm going to be the girl who does that bit but on a bigger scale. And he went, that's nice, darling. One step at a time. But, you know, it was a light bulb moment and I hung on to that little kernel. And down the track when I knew I was going to make it, I knew for sure I was going to make it. I can't explain how that is, but I knew. And I started studying. And I started sharing the odd thing on my social media. And the long story short is that over time, that little share became a blog, became a conversation, became this, became that, became something bigger than I ever anticipated. And I went, holy moly, this is going really well. Wow, this is working. I mean, I wasn't surprised, but I was. I was so encouraged that I thought, I better brand this thing. And so I did. I changed my page and I called it, hang on one moment. Came up with this funky little logo, Sober in the Country. That's me, a little bit skinnier, and my dog, and my husband. I wanted to brand it, and I wanted to create a virtual place where other rural people could come and chat and be part of this conversation. No, I had no intentions, no goals, no nothing in mind. I just wanted people to know that they weren't alone. That's all I had in mind. But it's blown my mind and gone far above and beyond that. And in 2 years of me doing what I do, which is talk a lot, often, this has reached the far corners of rural Australia into the hardest, toughest Aussie blokes of all, and women. People who are not supposed to be able to talk about these things are talking about it. It is mind-blowing and it is beautiful and it is the most humbling thing. I get emotional. It's the most humbling, beautiful thing I've ever been a part of because we are changing lives and we're saving lives and we're giving people a place to go. And you know what drives me really crazy about this whole thing? In the country, we will sit there and we will stand next to our mates and we'll slap them on the back and tell them to have another drink, and we will laugh when they get fall down drunk in public, time and time again. That's fine. That's not a problem. But when someone is brave enough to stand up and step out and say, I think I might have a problem here, I need some help, we cannot cope. We either tell them to wake up to themselves and have another drink, or we isolate them by telling them to go off and be anonymous. And what I'm doing is challenging that paradigm utterly as ineffective in every single way. In rural and regional communities, we are all about connection, we're all about supporting each other. We're all about being together and lifting our mates and baking things and delivering things and picking up dogs and babysitting kids. So how do we ever think isolating someone and telling them to be anonymous in their struggle is going to work? It strikes me as the cruelest paradox of all. And that is one of the reasons I blew my anonymity sky high and said, no way, this doesn't work. We've got to treat our mates with alcoholism the same way we treat our mates with cancer. It doesn't matter what the disease is. Everyone in our country towns is just as important as the next girl or the next guy. And we need to start talking about this. We need to look at prevention. rather than waiting until someone's got a diagnosis that's terrifying and life-ending. I often joke to my mates and say my purpose is to be enough of a pain in the bum and to have this conversation publicly enough times that I'm going to start infiltrating this sector with information so that maybe one day Joe Blow standing at the pub with his best mate, watching him get fall over drunk and drink drive home to his wife and kids again, might just say, "Mate, do you reckon maybe we should talk about your drinking?" You know? I'm not here to demonise people who drink. It's never been about that. I'm just here to raise this conversation so that our mates who do recognise there's an issue and step up have got access to information and they're less afraid, and so that those of us who don't have a problem understand we've got to go gently. We've got to look after our mates and do what we do best in Australia and support our friends. You know, it's not a big stretch. So my challenge to my friends, to rural Australia, and in fact Australia as a whole, is let's get real, let's get honest, let's get authentic in our chats. Let's take this further. You know, one day my goal, hopefully next year, is to get funding and support so I can actually get programs in place to support people. Because the power of this conversation and the realness of it and how far and wide that's going is proving again and again and again that people want this conversation and they need it. It's become like a Me Too movement for people who are sick of our boozy, alcohol worshipping culture. It's like a little Me Too movement going on, and it's so amazing. And it's got legs and it's got merit and it's happening. And it's just one girl with a laptop who started a yarn. How incredible is that? I want to leave you with a thought, which is that alcoholism does not discriminate. So why should we? Thank you so much.